Nice. Yeah.
Yeah. So welcome everyone to the Nerds, Goths, Geeks, and Freaks, Outsiders in Chicanx and Latinx Young Adult Literature Book Party.
Woo!
Yay. We have made it. Thank you all for being here. I know this is a bit strange. Well, first of all, I'm Trevor Buffoni. I don't know if everyone knows me. I'm one of the co-editors with Cristina Herrera, who for me is top left of the screen. And we were originally wanted to do like I don't want to say a proper book launch in Fresno, but then all of the things happened, right? And so here we are, but actually I think this works out better because we can all be together, and some of us we've actually never met, right? Or never, seen each other like this. So it's quite exciting. And so what we're gonna do, it's very informal, much like Zoom Life. And we really just wanna have a chance to kind of talk and tell stories and really just share space with each other. And we don't want to take too much time either, because we do, recognize that Zoom can be exhausting, right? I know we have a lot of things happening in our lives. So, we'll be here for a bit and celebrate the book and see what might come of it, right? So Christina is gonna, what we'll do is we'll talk a little bit about the book very briefly, and then we will make space for everyone who's involved in the book to share, and I'll talk about what we can share in a second, and also the writers who we study and write about in the book, such as a few of them are here. So we'll give them space as well. So Christina, do you want to take it over?
Sure. Yeah. Okay, so hi everybody, and thanks for being here. Some of you have just signed on. So I see Carla, how are you?
Good. Hi,
some of my
Christina.
favorite people are here. So yeah, I just want to talk a couple minutes of, I think, because one of the questions that we've gotten in the past couple of months is how this book came to be. How did Trevor and I start working together? And so as some of you all maybe read in the acknowledgements, we met 6 years ago. And so since 6 years ago, Trevor and I have been growing in our, not only our collaborative and professional relationship, but really in our friendship. And so my nickname for Trevor is Hermanito. I've never had a little brother. I'm the youngest. So we've had that kind of fun relationship. And so over a series of conversations Trevor and I kept having, we were talking a lot about our love of nerdy things. We both love tennis, and we're both really avid readers, and we learned that we have similar kinds of working styles. And so it was over these conversations about things that we loved that I started commenting that this was a time that I started noticing a sort of resurgence, especially of Latinx media. Sites like Remezcla and Me Too and others were really paying a lot of attention to cholas and homegirls. And I was really excited about this kind of, pop cultural attention to this group that's always been marginalized, misunderstood. But one of the things that I commented to Trevor is that it was kind of a double-edged sword, because I remember being really excited and hyped up about this well-deserved attention to cholas and to cholos. I was questioning why it was that it was starting to be the only kind of identity being associated with particularly young Latinas and teenage Latinas. And what I also thought was really interesting is of why this attention was happening. It was coinciding with what we started seeing in the Latinx and young adult publishing world, with this growth of texts that featured characters that were sort of the opposite, right, of cholas, right? These were characters who are often maligned because of their difference from this identity. And so it was really interesting that we're starting to, at this time, we see these texts like Juliet Takes a Breath, Aristotle and Dante discover the secrets of the universe, Gabby, A Girl in Pieces, and of course, the really popular I'm Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter. And so I thought that there was an interesting sort of time that these different conversations are happening. But a question that I kept asking is, well, what about outsiders, right? What about characters that are cast aside for being queer, for being Afro-Latinx, for being nerds, for being artists and poets. I had just published an article looking at what I call Chica nerds in Chicana young adult literature. And I told Trevor, like, there's always been, and even in a literature intended for adults, there's always been characters who are quirky and smart and weird, but there's never been a volume that's been dedicated solely to these kinds of identities that may not fit into the stereotype of what we see. And in fact, these characters push against a very simplistic, narrow way of understanding Latinx youth. And so over the course of our conversations, we realized that there was a real need for an anthology that focused solely on these kinds of identities, especially since there's no anthology on Latinx young adult literature, none. And even in some of the existing anthologies that we were using, there were maybe 1 or 2 chapters at the most. And so we realized that there was a real need. And I think it was just one of our epic Facebook conversations, Facebook Messenger conversations, where we came up with the title. And we said, we've got to work together. And so I've been begging Trevor to work with me for about 6 years. And we just needed the right kind of project. And so that's really how this book was born, out of a need to amplify and center voices that you may not see, even though we know that they've always been there. And so that's how we worked. And it was a really smooth process working together. I have to say this was the most fun I've ever had on a book. And I say that sincerely because I've had some bad experiences. And then of course the professionalism with UPM, they are just absolutely amazing. And we just couldn't be happier than with this publisher.
Well, congratulations to both of you. I know what it's like to edit a book, and it's a lot of work, and I'm really happy for you both, and it's great that you've done this. So this is wonderful.
Thank you, Carla and Christina. So what we want to do is we're just going to kind of work through the table of contents, and this could be quick. It won't take a while, but I want to give everyone who's in the book space to talk about their work, not necessarily like this is what I write about in the chapter, so much as maybe what drew you to writing about this, right? What drew you to this YA book or this play? If you're a writer, we want to give you the chance to talk as well. You can talk about that, topic too. Also, the book is about nerds and outsiders, so we thought it'd be fun if we shared stories of when we have, our nerddom, right, and our nerdiness and outsiderness, right? If you feel comfortable sharing those with us. So we'll just go through, and if it gets to your turn and you don't want to say anything, that's totally fine. No one has to speak, but we do want to give you the chance to say something if you'd like, okay? So the book, it doesn't, I don't want to say, we didn't break form. We went pretty standard anthology style here. And Christina and I have introduction we wrote, and then Guadalupe, I'm trying to read, speak, and do a lot of things. Guadalupe Garcia Mical, who I don't believe is with us right now, but if she pops in, we'll come back to her. But she's a very decorated YA writer, and she wrote our foreword. And then our chapters start with our artist and punk section. So we have Amanda Ellis, who is here with a quite impressive bookshelf and a Beauty and the Beast book ladder library thing happening. Do you want to talk about one of those things, your nerddom, or why you chose Gabby, A Girl in Pieces? Or
Sure. I absolutely love Isabel Quintero's Gabby, A Girl in Pieces. This is definitely one of those instances where me search is research. And I connected with the central character, Gabby, relationship to the printed word. I think your question about how and when one identified themselves as a nerd, like it was really Monday morning quarterbacking for me. I didn't realize I was a nerd until I got called out incessantly for being one. You said bring a picture, so like just look at that. That's pre hair products there, okay? So not only did I not know I was a nerd until like I got called out, Gabby's relationship to the printed word was kind of like that mirror, a Lacanian like mirror stage moment where I was like, I needed this book growing up. My chapter contribution basically focuses on Gabby's relationship to the printed word, to poetry, to zine writing, to creative revision, and how she develops as just as a person and leverages rhetorical strategies that she develops to kind of survive the throes of adolescence. And I didn't realize that I was doing that as a child, but really early on in like my early teenage years, my mom sat me down and showed me a whole bunch of like my own protest poetry, like the angry things I would scrawl out if I caught a punishment or, you know, I was just in trouble. I would run off and write and then, you know, slide it to mommy. And she kept it. And I realized like in early teenagehood that like this has always been a strategy for me too, to get really, really angry and to use, put the pen to the page to really unpack my feelings. So this particular work was just super, super beautiful in that sense, that writing and in fact her relationship to reading and to poetry became precisely what she leveraged in like these really, really low times. And so that's my chapter and that's my connection to this work. Later on, I knew I was a nerd. Like I realized, oh my gosh, Daria from MTV, that's kind of like me, except, you know, I'm way browner, but yeah.
I love the picture. I didn't think anyone would actually bring a picture. And so now I'm trying to find, I have a baseball picture.
Oh my God.
From my baseball days. Okay. I think Christina's got her pick. So moving on from Amanda, we have Leticia Terrones, who has written about the first rule of punk. Leticia.
Hi, everybody. It's so wonderful to see your faces and to hear your voices. I'm just really honored to be part of this project. And I guess this is sort of like an essay that I have been writing for a long time, and then maybe even still am continuing to write in a way. Because I feel like Chicanas and punk rock have been sort of like part of my aesthetic and kind of, I don't know, rebellion too, since I was I'm from LA, I'm from East LA, and I'm really lucky because my older brother, Humberto, is really involved in the LA underground art world, and so like all of my musical influences and just all the stuff that I was into, you know, like when you become a kid, when you know start kind of like breaking out of your identity with your mom, I guess, like as a kid, you start sort of like realizing like, oh, I can have this other little world, you know, outside of the family, and my mom's not even going to know anything that happened at school. So I guess like at that point, probably for me was like 7th grade, coincided with like just getting into music from my brother's influence. And he is friends with, for instance, Teresa Covarrubias, who is who's featured in the first rule of punk as an inspiration for Malou. And so very similar. I also felt like I was reading about myself in reading Malou's story, because I'm also a big fan of Teresa Covarrubias, and I don't know if you can maybe see like right there on my wall. My sister made this, I'm not gonna pull it from my wall, but she made that in like shop class at Hollenbeck Junior High School. It's just an image from the Bratz album. And so, so my story or my essay is situating Malu in a genealogy of Black and brown punk rock women. And so I think that that's just an important affirmation for me to make as someone who is, you know, I don't know, oftentimes in like strange worlds in the academy. So yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say about the essay. Yeah. I don't know if that was probably totally convoluted and unclear and all over the place.
You did great.
No, it was fine.
So moving on, we have Adriana Santos, who I believe is, there she is, who's written about A Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter and Gabby, A Girl in Pieces.
Hi everyone, it's so amazing to see you. I probably won't talk for long because I'm managing some, can you hear that? Some kids in the other room. I just want to thank you so much for putting this anthology together, and I can't wait to read everybody's pieces. So thank you so much.
We love the kids. We love them. So from the artists and punks, we move into the section on superheroes and other worldly beings. Christy Cook, I don't believe, is with us, but we do have Marta Acosta with us, the writer of the vampire, oh gosh. You know what, I'm gonna let Marta take it over.
You know, I used to deny being a vampire writer, but after you've written 5 books with vampires in them, I think you kind of keep denying it. But I was very happy to be in this collection. As a humor writer, I love being taken seriously because of my humor has subtext. It is, life is ugly enough, life is bitter enough. And so I try and use humor to get my message through. And I loved Milagro. I wrote that. My Milagro books were written sort of in response to all the speculative fiction, all the American fiction that excludes Latinas and excludes our voices and our presence. And so I wanted to say, you know, I said, why? Why are they not there? So I did a comedy. I did it in a comedy of manners style. My publishers were looking for a Latina Terry McMillan, but they got me. So they didn't know what to do with me. Publishers have never known what to do with me. I actually did write a YA book for Tor McMillan called Dark Companion. It's a gothic. It's about a very nerdy girl, but she's mixed race, and it's about class exploitation. And it is my funny-looking redheaded child of a book. It's a YA with multicultural, about class, and it's never been recognized as a book about a multicultural teen character. I don't know why. I love being here. Leticia, glad to hear you write about punks, because I was the girl who ripped up my t-shirts, burned holes in them, and went to concerts, and we called it pogoing in the day. We didn't call it the mosh pit. And I was a nerd, I guess. I did not think I was. I thought everyone else was horrible. But I guess I was the horrible one. Anyway, I'm working on some other books. I love writing. I love books, and I'm so glad that the authors of this book are, you know, sort of recognizing us and understanding what we're doing and hearing our voices. To me, that's so important, and I really wish that Christy had been here, because I'm so grateful to her for getting me somewhere out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Marta. So moving on, we have Domino Perez has written about Shadow Shaper by Daniel Jose Older, and Labyrinth Lost by Zoraida Cordova. I don't believe any of them are here, but that does give us a little more time for Ella Diaz, right? Who's also written about Shadow Shaper by Daniel Jose Older. And Daniel sent me a video. I am not technically adept. So I'm gonna email everyone after this with the video that Daniel has made for us. So look for that after the after our Zoom party. So Ella, you wanna talk? Ella, you are muted.
All right, well, I just said the most amazing things.
It was brilliant.
So I just was congratulating everyone. I've made my way halfway through the anthology here in quarantine, and I've just been really pleased, and it's just a pleasure to read. One of the things I wanted to compliment the editors on it in their section on EK Reclaiming Outsiders is in teaching intro to Latina, Latino, now Latinx literature for 2 semesters here. I actually used the Motoko Rich article on the absence of, and I see a lot of nods, we all sort of have been in this conversation for some time, this frustrating conversation with ourselves and our students about this ongoing, never-ending, where is the Latinx literature, and Latinos or Latinas don't write, and yada yada, and they go on. And for those of us that have studied literary history, there's all these arguments about, well, technically you could say, you know, Latinx literature, Chicanx literature is as old or older than, you know, the nation. But then we also leave out our regional writers, right? And I, of course, forgot all of their names. But so it was really fascinating to read that section of your intro and to position the book and finally bring sort of, I don't want to say visibility, but sort of bring us all into the conversation that we've been having in our classrooms with our students, like the politics of who gets published and not. And I found a lot of echoes about that even in Domino's chapter on Shadow Shaper. She was sort of nodding to some of the issues that I was nodding to. So what brought me to this book actually was a student. I don't typically write anymore about literature. I'm one of those outliers in, I'm an American Studies PhD, and I tend to go more visual art history. But I can't remember the class. I think I was co-teaching a class called Visualizing El Barrio, and a young woman from Los Angeles that now is working, I think at LACMA, she told me about Shadow Shaper. And said, you should check out this book. And so I always take student suggestions. And so I read it, and I was like in the middle of my own work. And I was like, this is a total reference to Osco, even if, you know, Danielle didn't mean it. And this reminds me of, like, with the chalking, I kept thinking of De La Vega, and I was thinking of Keith Haring. And then, you know, wanting to be specific to Afro-Latinx and Afro-Latinidad and Puerto Riqueña history, I didn't want to just situate Sierra Santiago within a Chicanx tradition, which I obviously gestured to sort of the pantheon, the Yolanda Lopez's, the Mujeres Muralistas, you know, all of those folks. But I wanted to make sure that I called out, you know, the East Coast references to street art and throw-ups and Sandra Fabera, Lady Pink, all of that sort of in the background. And I tended to stick there and think about the politics of space and gentrification. And he did some kind of extraordinary things in this book. I was really taken aback with the direct clapback that he makes on gentrification and the displacement of long-held community spaces, and directly implicating coloniality in that. And it made me think about young adult readers and how I'm such an ageist. I always think, you know, these are such sophisticated topics. And I was like, gosh, no, this is the everyday reality of these young people and these up and comers in Brooklyn. That one scene where they're in that bougie coffee shop, right? And it's all kids of color and they're talking hella loud, you know, and but they're commenting on the $4 lattes and the cold presses and all of that. And that tension of wanting to be in these spaces because they're new and they're different, but also recognizing that it's swallowing up your neighborhood. I think he did a really good job of thinking about spirituality and consciousness raising as a painful process. I think that speaks to the goth, the nerd, the outsider experience. So much of our character is formed because of pain. when we have these identities, when we're, you know, neither here nor there, so to speak, you know, for those of us, you know, various reasons why we're rejected from the intra-ethnic group or the inter-ethnic group, or, you know, so I think that he really sort of brought all of that together, the pain of adolescence, but also the pain of consciousness raising, coming into awareness of oppression and exclusion. And the last thing I'll say, that one scene that I really rocked my world is when Sierra's getting taken down by the throng hate. And then in relaying it to her new friend, Robbie, what she actually talks about is hearing the voices of the people that thought, oh, it's just another drunk Puerto Rican from the club, you know, she's probably ODing. And so it's that sort of tension of, you know, the supernatural and then the reality that no one would help her because she was sort of in the wrong neighborhood, so to speak, even though it had formerly been a people of color neighborhood. So just a really rich book, respects its young adult audience, doesn't assume that anything is above their level of understanding. Yeah, that's it. I really enjoyed writing it. Thank you for including me. It was an easy breezy experience and probably one of the best I've had too.
Thank you, Ella. The next section of the book, Lati Nerds and Bookworms. The next chapter is by the one and only Roxanne Schroeder Arce, who has written about Miriam Gonzalez's play, The Smartest Girl in the World. So Roxanne, do you want to go and then Miriam jump in?
Yes, that would be great. I would love to introduce Miriam. I am so happy to be here, loving the discourse, really missing the martinis, just have to say. So martinis on Fresno State sometime, I call it. I'm Roxanne Schroeder Arce. I'm zooming in from Austin, and I am currently director of You Teach Fine Arts, which is fine arts education. I'm also an associate professor in the Department of Theater and Dance, and I am honored that our new chair joined me today, as well as Miriam, but I'm really happy that Robert Ramirez is here. I asked him to come and he said yes, so thank you, Robert. Your support is so awesome. So, and congratulations to Robert, who's one of my favorite Latino nerds, and the new chair of the Department of Theater and Dance at UT. And also, I really want to say thank you to Christina and Trevor. We are becoming close colleagues, and I really appreciate that. And I used to be at Fresno State, so really I honor you and celebrate you. And this book is just gorgeous. I mean, I think we all should all hold it up if we got ours already. And I'm sorry to hear, Tim, that you don't have yours yet, but I'm sure it's in the mail. But anyhow, oh yeah, take a photo of that. It's so good. We'll have to do that. But anyway, I'll keep going. So I also want to say, huh? What?
Oh, I said we'll close with a picture. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I wanted to say congratulations to everyone. What beautiful work. It's really a lovely collection. I am loving going through it again and just finding all of the ways that our words are in conversation with one another. And this came out a little too late for my Latinx Theater for Young Audiences class, but certainly I hope to use it in the future, and I hope many people will. So congratulations to you. I was in my final this morning with a student who was talking about her own identity, and she was talking about being smart as a young person, and how that she had to fight stereotypes as a young Latina. And it was really reminding me of this book, and also specifically of the play The Smartest Girl in the World by Miriam Gonzalez, which I am absolutely in love with. The timing of this book was really amazing to me because I was in the midst of, I had just directed The Smartest Girl in the World, and so I was talking with Trevor, and I was like, that's the piece I want to write about. So it's been a joy getting close to your words, Miriam, both through directing the play and then getting to really explore it as a scholar. So it's not often that as an artist and scholar, I get to be so close to the words and that you've written. The play is published by Dramatic Publishing. It is absolutely gorgeous, as well as so many of Miriam's plays. And I'm really honored to have gotten to write about that. And I'm really, really honored that you're here today. So thank you, Miriam. Would you, so I'm introducing you and we'd love to hear from you. Yeah, if you don't mind.
Hi, no, thank you for having me, and thank you for highlighting the book, Roxanne, and to everyone for publishing it. It's great to see everybody. Yeah, I wrote this as a reflection, a lot about reflecting my own childhood, really. It's not completely autobiographical, but part of it is. And it was really important to me, I think, to highlight the diversity of our people and the universality of who we are and what it means to grow up as a Latina in America. To talk about that, the need to achieve the message I think probably all of us got from our grandparents and our parents, that to make it in this world, you've got to be, the smartest, the best, especially if you're a woman, Latina. That's sort of the message I got. You've got to do extra this, extra that to prove yourself. And then what it means to, when you do try to become that, some of the ostracization you feel when you are trying to achieve, and some of the nerdiness that when you start going down that path, and some of the times when your friends would kind of label you the brain or whatever, and trying to fit in with other people in your groups. So that, but also I think the bigger societal message I was also really interested in exploring was, what does it mean when we do start achieving, and across the generations, and what happens to us when we do start making it, and sort of the conflicts that happen within your family when you start to go up the ladder and start to assimilate or acculturate. What do you leave behind? What are the compromises you have to make? And I think the play was about that, and that saying that really, the danger of doing that, the danger of losing yourself, the danger of estranging yourself from family, to live in both worlds, and maybe an upper class or middle class world versus the family you're leaving behind as you try to make it, and how important it is not to make those compromises, and what does it mean to be smart, and what does it mean to explore and discover who you are, and to be who you are, and to celebrate your uniqueness, does not mean leaving your family behind, or your culture, or whatever. So that was another sort of theme in the play. But I love being a part of this book, because I definitely always considered myself a nerd growing up. I was always had a cachucha on, a winter hat on, reading. Like, I would read the same book 500 times. I'd be in a dark room reading. For some reason, I was into Gone with the Wind, and I read it like 12 times. And I would make commercials and talk to myself in the mirror constantly. My cousin and my brother always, called me Mibble, after like Sybil, because I have 5,000 personalities. I was always talking in different voices, putting on commercials, talking in the mirror. So I definitely lived in a little imaginary world, and was always reading. So that was sort of my nerdy side. But I love celebrating the diversity of who we are. I think every shade of Latina is perfect. Just because I know right now, especially, there's a lot of Latinos who have lost their language, but it doesn't mean you're less Latino. I think embracing your whole self and every aspect of who you are is important, and that we have to appreciate and not judge one another, depending on all those things, that we're pura Latinas if that's how we feel inside. So anyway, that's sort of my 2 cents behind Smartest Girl, and thank you, Roxanne, so much for making it a part of this journal. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Miriam. So next we have co-editor Cristina Herrera, who her chapter is on Yaqui Delgado Wants to Kick Your Ass. Cristina.
Okay, so I won't take up too much time just so we can give our contributors more of the platform. But I mentioned it a little bit. Hey, bye Miriam, thank you. I mentioned a little bit in the introduction just how characters like the protagonist Pity Sanchez are often marginalized, but what really drew me to the book is the sense of constantly having to defend one's Latinidad because your identity may not fit into mainstream notions of what it means to be Latina. But the other thing, personally, I think that what really, or why I wrote this chapter, is I understood intimately what it was like to be pitied, to be bullied, and the sheer terror of going to school every day in high school, wondering if you're going to get jumped, right? Of being, things like being called a coconut and, constantly being told to prove that I was Chicana, even though that was all that I knew. That's what my parents are, my grandparents, everything. And I was really struck, like Pity, that with people without knowing anything about me assumed all these bad things without any understanding of where I came from or of my family's history on both sides, my parents' sides. But the fact that she's able to write from this perspective of a girl who's tortured, and then the moment when the video of her getting jumped is uploaded to YouTube is such a 21st century reality. And so just a side note, I've been teaching this book for a couple of years. It's a fairly recent book. It's only about 5 years old. But I've been teaching it for the last couple of semesters. And this is by far the book that my students most respond to. And there was one semester I'll never forget. I had one student who talked about her experiences being bullied. And then I had the other student who identified as the bully in high school, and it was in the same classroom. And it was such a wonderful moment, because the one thing that my student, she said, I was the bad kid. And when I asked her, like, what do you mean? What do you mean by the bad kid? And she said, I was always fighting. I was always getting in trouble. I was always getting suspended. But nobody knew anything about what I was going through. Nobody knew about my home life. Nobody knew any of that. And that was the only way that I could solve my problems, is just by picking on others and by fighting. And it was just a really interesting conversation. And I think one of the most powerful things about this novel is that while we're supposed to identify with the protagonist because she's bullied, there's so many unanswered questions that Meg Medina leaves hanging. And the first one is, what happens to the girl who bullies? What about her? And so, I don't know, in my chapter, I've tried to do justice by thinking about the larger issue as well of what happens to girls like Yaqui, the one who's known as the bully, who just sort of falls through the cracks, right? The one who is identified as the bad kid, the way my student was. And so here's my student, she was about to graduate, and she was still carrying this weight of being labeled as the bad kid. And what she said so articulately was that it didn't matter what she did. It didn't matter that she got good grades, because she was always going to be labeled as the bad kid simply for being a young girl of color, and simply because of the way she looked. And so, and I don't know, that's one of the things I always write about, things that I'm drawn to personally, that I can identify with in some way. And Yaqui Delgado Wants to Kick Your Ass. It's an amazing, amazing book. And I think the other thing too that's interesting, it's really easy to teach. So I highly encourage all of you to teach it, incorporate it into your classrooms, because there's some really great things to think about as far as even social media use, right? So that's it. And one just closing thing, this stems from some of my work that I've done on Chicana NERDS. And when I showed the article to my mom, I show all my stuff to my mom. She said, "Pero tú no eres una nerd." So I had to like defend, because in her mind, una nerd, that's what she called me. That was like Steve Urkel. Like, she didn't understand why I would consciously want to identify. And she wanted to save me from that, you know. And I think some of it was also her, but I didn't raise it, yo no creo una nerd, you know. So I just think it's really interesting that she's kind of getting to a point where, okay, now I understand why this identity is so important to you. That's it.
Thank you, Christina. And also, I want to take a quick pause because Christina has another book that maybe is coming out as we speak with Routledge, Chica Nerds. So Christina will pop the link into the chat right now. So y'all can all check out her other book. She's rocking and rolling this spring. That brings us to Tim Wadham, I think, yeah, who's written about Pat Mora and Jose Cruz Gonzalez's work on Tomas Rivera.
Let me first say that while I am truly honored to be in this company, and thank you, Christina and Trevor, for accepting my proposal. I'm coming at this from quite a different path than most all of you. This started actually when I was working on my bachelor's degree in Spanish language and literature, and I first discovered Tomas Rivera and his work and the work of other Chicano writers, especially Rodolfo Anaya, and fell in love with it. And I went on a different path and ended up as a public librarian for a long time. But coming with this background in Spanish language and literature, I was looking for books to share with the many Latinx kids that I worked with on a daily basis in various public libraries, and beginning in Dallas, Texas, where there were a lot of Latinx kids coming into the library and nothing to share with them in their native language, and that led me to writing a book that I wrote about just finding and using Spanish language books in public libraries with kids, and that became really popular. That actually sold quite a lot. So, and it was in that process that I first became acquainted with the work of Pat Mora, and as I moved on to different library jobs, and Pat Mora released her book, Tomas and the Library Lady, which I immediately embraced and read to as many students of any background. It didn't matter what background. I read them to every student I could find, but particularly for those Latinx students that I read this story to, I was very moved by the reactions that I saw as they listened to this story and saw the photo of the real Tomas Rivera on the final page. And that's when, having gotten to know Pat Mora at library conferences and through other ways, I just realized that this story would have much more powerful impact. It needed to be shared, but it would have much more powerful impact if it were placed on put on the stage. And so that's where my chapter came from, and it's a little different from others in that it's more about a personal experience. I always tell everyone that my experience working with Jose Cruz Gonzalez and Pat Mora, bringing Tomas to the stage, was the most important thing that I've ever done in my career. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity to share what I learned, and to share what I learned about Tomas and his nerdiness, and being the proto-nerd of Latinx literature. And it deeply moves me because Rivera was a nerd, and I had the wonderful opportunity to travel to Hampton, Iowa, researching and helping Jose Cruz Gonzalez, who is one of the great playwrights for young people of our time, but helping him as he was working on the play. And I went to Hampton and talked with the librarian there, and what I discovered more than what Pat Mora had in the book, and what I discovered is that this young boy who was so impacted by a librarian, it was because they were both nerds in such a way. They were both outsiders. The librarian was a German American who spoke in a thick accent. And they related to each other because for neither of them was English their first language. And that, when I discovered that and did more research into the life of the librarian, whose name is Bertha Galki, it touched me and it touched Jose. And Jose, his play became more about Tomas Rivera and his journey as a writer rather than as a reader, which is what Pat's book is about. But together, it's just a marvelous story for anyone who feels outside, the norm for whatever reason. And I clearly was a nerd when I was growing up, and I'm working on, I have one book for young children published by Candlewick Press, but I'm working on a novel that's semi-autobiographical, but it's based on some bullying experience that I had when I was in middle school. And I was bullied because I took a briefcase to school. Never. That was like the worst thing I could have done. But it clearly signified me as an uber nerd. Plus the fact, that I was interested in reading and classical music and old movies at the University Film Society. So I made myself a very clear target for some bullies, and one bully in particular who actually injured me somewhat, almost severely, and who's now become a very well-to-do businessman. But I know what it feels like to be on the outside, to not be the same as everyone else, whether it's just because of your interests, just lie outside the norm or whatever. Yeah, I know I brought some of it on myself, but still, that's another reason why I think Tomas Rivera's story appealed to me, in the fact that he triumphed over it and succeeded. And so that's kind of my story and the story of my chapter and my nerdiness. And right now I'm moving on from librarianship and working towards getting back into higher education, and that I deeply appreciate you, Christina and Trevor, for helping me on that path and accepting this paper. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tim, for sharing. So the next chapter is I wrote, and I don't want to take too much time, but I do want to show you a picture that my family continues to use to make fun of me. This is when I played baseball. I don't know if you can see it. Oh, you can't really see it. No, you can get the idea though, but my face is like, I was not a baseball player, okay? As much as my family tried to make me into a baseball player, they ended up by high school calling me and my friends the nerd herd, because my friends, we were all like top 10 in the class, right? I only went to school with 12 people though. No, I'm kidding. Anyway, I want to give my time to Emilio Rodriguez. I wrote about the play. It's not a TYA play, but it's a play about two queer Latinx teenagers called Swimming While Drowning. And I love this play. It's actually how I met Emilio. We've become very good friends, and he's here. And he, I know, will have stories that will wow you. He's a big deal, Emilio. And we cut our hair on Instagram Live together a few weeks ago. Which is why he looks better than me, but he's going to tell you all kinds of fun things right now. No pressure.
No pressure. And I want to shout out the Bell book ladder, which is my own Bell thing for all the Disney nerds out there, because I love your Bell book ladder. I'm like, I need one of those. So yeah, thank you so much, Trevor, for creating this space and for including me. I'm like super honored by it. And I think for me, a lot of my inspiration comes from the fact that I did feel like I didn't even feel like a lot of people were saying, maybe we didn't have access to the word nerd, but we did feel like outsiders or feel like we didn't fit in different various ways. And I think that like some people in my generation may feel like we did have some really cool representation in television, but it wasn't specifically Latinx. Like someone had mentioned Steve Urkel earlier, and I was like, oh yeah. And then it also reminds me of the show Smart Guy that I was obsessed with as a kid. For those of you who don't know, Smart Guy, it was Tia and Tamara's little brother was like a 12-year-old genius who went to high school with his two older siblings who were high school age and going to high school, and then he was a 12-year-old trying to go to high school with them because he was a genius. And that was like my favorite show. I was obsessed, and I was always like, as a kid, I was like, they could do a Latino version of this, and I could be the smart 12-year-old kid. So I saw so much of myself in that character and in that show, and I kind of always wished for like, what would representation be like for Latinx people, and what would it be like if we didn't have to fit into a box of what everyone thinks of as Latinx, but we could just be whatever our American experience is, and that it could be different for different people. Someone earlier had mentioned like diversity and variety and having different experiences, and I think that's what I really appreciate whenever I'm in a space, particularly with Latinx theater artists, and then you see like the lineup of what the festival is, and it's this variety of, some people's story is like they are a first generation from some Latin American country and their experience growing up here, and some people are second generation, some people are like fifth generation and don't speak Spanish and have no specific cultural connection. So I just love seeing all the variety whenever we come in a space together. It's pretty powerful.
Thank you, Emilio. And I do want to do another haircut soon, so look out for that text.
Yes, I ordered some clippers on Amazon, so I can do it legit this time.
We're almost to the end of our book. We have Elena Aviles wrote about Gary Soto's Chato series, but Elena couldn't be with us today. And so that brings us to one of my favorite people and one of my grad school buddies, Carolina Alonso, who is kicking ass in Colorado these days. Who has written about Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Ben Alire Sáenz, and What Night Brings by Carla Trujillo. So Carolina, do you want to talk, and then Carla can jump in?
I'll just be quiet. I'll be quiet.
Okay.
I would rather hear Carolina.
Cool.
I just want to say that I've been like, my heart's pounding really fast because I know Carla's here. And I know that, you know, it just feels like I'm a groupie or something. But first, thank you, Trevor and Christina, for, you know, getting us together. I'm zooming from this little small town in close to Veracruz, Mexico. And so I've been here for 2 weeks, and it's nice to see, you know, all of you and to meet people that I've, you know, just read about but never seen your faces. So thank you. You know, I wanted to write this chapter, you know, for a long time, because I know that we all have those couple of, you know, books that changed our lives and that in many different ways just, you know, we connected with. And to me, What Night Brings is that book. I read it when I was 23 years old, in my first year in grad school, probably when I met Trevor in Houston at the PhD, and I was going to do a PhD in Latin American literature, and then I read What Night Brings, and then I just felt like that was the book that I was wanting to read since probably I was 14 years old, right? That I never read, and I never had the opportunity to see myself, you know, reflected on pages, on, you know, and it was just such an amazing experience. So I changed to US Latino literature, Latinx literature, and it's just amazing that I was able to write about these two books, because I think as I teach them now, I can see how a lot of the students feel the necessity of see themselves represented, validated, and all these different questions and struggles about our identities. And I have to say that I teach at a college that has over 40% of Native American students, which is the majority. And so it's really interesting for me when, you know, we read What Night Brings. I mean, the Four Corners with New Mexico as well. So there's so much about that too. But just how students of color can connect with, you know, Aristotle and Dante and What Night Brings, and just the idea that young queer people can have happy endings, right? And not see ourselves in, you know, having characters die and all this, kill your queer characters in television and all these things, and just to be able to see the books that are, you know, have a lot of, you know, violence and difficulty for their protagonists, but at the end there's hope. There's this idea that, you know, we can be successful, happy, queer, Latino, Chicanos, Chicanx, Latinx people. It's amazing. And so I'm really happy to be part of this book and to write about those two amazing texts.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I believe that's everyone in our book and our writers, but we do have a little bit of time, and I want to, if Robert or Elisa wants to share a story about their nerddom. We had some comments about Robert's Catholic school dress at a public school and how that went. If you want to share, now's the time. If not, we're so happy to have you.
Yeah, I don't know what got into me. My mom worked at the school, the elementary school I went to in the front. And the teacher sent me one day down to the office with a note, and I walked in and she was like, "What are you wearing?" And I said, "Well, this is how I'm dressing from now on. This is who I am." And then, of course, out on the playground, you know, it was like Gilbert and, you know, Juan and Manny all threatened to kick my ass, you know, behind the bathrooms. but that's in my mind who I was. I was just this nerd. And, you know, I forget who it was that said, you know, I was always in a room in the dark reading, always just constantly, all day long. My mother would come in and be like, "Hey, turn on a light, you're gonna go blind." But that's who I was. And, you know, in my career as an actor, I've just been so fortunate because my big breakthrough as an audiobook narrator was narrating a series of Gary Soto's books. And that was the first time as an actor that I saw myself in what I was reading, and it blew my mind, you know, because I didn't grow up with that in my life. And then I was really fortunate enough to go on and narrate Bless Me Ultima by Rodolfo Anaya, which was I knew the book, but to be able to speak the words was such a blessing to me, you know, and a really again, an experience that really changed my life. So I just want to say congratulations to you all. Felicidades. This is an amazing accomplishment. And I'm so happy that I can be here to support not just my colleague Roxanne, but you, Trevor, and all of you as my colleagues in the world, as educators and as artists. And I'm so proud of this work that you're doing.
Elisa?
Yes. So I'm here to celebrate you guys. Ella, you know, sort of sent me a little invite saying, "Hey, do you want to come to the virtual book launch?" And I said, "Yes, of course," because Trevor and Cristina is their project and I'm so thrilled for them. And then she said, "You might want to share a story or two." And I have so many stories. You don't want to get me really started, but I will say this. I'll tell you one little story. Look at Ella. She's like, "Yeah, I knew she had stories." So I cannot wait to get my hands on this book and to teach it, especially like in a first-year seminar. I think it's going to be amazing for talking about identity and alienation, which are like my two big, like alienation is kind of where I live, right? All of us, right? I think if you wanted like, you know, this, to talk about all these outsiders, like alienation is the common thread. And my growing up, I wanted to be that kid who just sat in the dark reading all the time, but I was a girl and I was the oldest girl in a Mexican immigrant parents. So ven a ayudar, ven a saludar, come to the kitchen, come and help, come take care of your brothers and sisters, come and be with the family. So I couldn't really be a legit, you know, sort of full nerd. Then I really wanted, I mean, I was born in 1971, so the early 80s is when I hit middle school, and I wanted nothing more than to wear thrift store granny boots and old man sweaters and the whole sort of like goth uniform in the early 80s. And my mother was like, "No, little girls don't wear black," right? So I wanted to be goth, but I couldn't. And look at me now, right? This is what happens when you don't let a 12-year-old dress how she wants. And then when I got to high school, and then we were in Tijuana for a little bit, so I was a super outsider, and then we came back. And also a big part of my alienation was, of course, class-based, right? And, you know, when I got to junior high, like everyone stopped talking to me. Very, very briefly, some things have been kind of like, I came out last year and I'm kind of like, oh, I wonder if maybe I was like super losing out on everyone. And that's why they stopped talking to me. Interesting, right? I mean, there's all kinds of ways that we can explain that nerdiness, that alienation to ourselves. And it's fascinating, and I congratulate all of you. And the other funny thing is, of course, that, you know, I started having this conversation because of this book party. That, you know, I had the conversation with my wife and with my 11-year-old son, and we were talking about, you know, she is basically like, well, you know, she like, where we were trying to sort of figure out where we stand in this taxonomy of alienation and style, like really stylized alienation, because that's what I think about goth, right? That we take our alienation and we like dress it up in lace and black and fancy earrings and whatever. I mean, this is a conversation that crosses generations. I mean, sort of what we mean by goth in the 80s or the 90s or now means, like, it's just, I'm super excited for your book, and there's ways that this is resonating in all kinds of registers for me, and I'm really excited and happy to see this out in the world, and I can't wait to read it. I shaved the side of my head for this phone call. I was like, oh, it's a party. It's a party. I need to shave.
And are those little kitten ears? Are those the little ears?
Yeah. Cat eye makeup. I mean, you know, nice. Quarantine. What else am I gonna do?
This is the first time I've worn lipstick in months, right?
You look amazing.
Thank
you look so sharp.
Yeah, I wear makeup every day, whether I leave the house or not.
I know you do.
Yeah.
I know. You look great every day. Yeah.
You look amazing. Amazing. Yes.
Thank you.
And I love the whole just taking control of that language and those words, you know, the whole taxonomy that's used against us. We disidentify with it and we fill it with ourselves and our stories, and then it takes on a whole new kind of power. And that's what I really love about this. So congratulations to everyone.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And thank you everyone who shared. A few quick things and then we'll let you go. If you have your book, if you want to hold it up, we'll do a group photo. And if you don't want to be in the photo, you can take your video off. That's totally fine.
Trevor, are you gonna do it, or do you need
I'm gonna try to like have my hands across the computer. I might do like one of these.
Okay.
I'm gonna try this.
So I'll do that.
I can reach. I can't reach.
You got it.
You guys,
you're better at selfies than I. There you go.
Hey, you guys, I can do the screenshot because I don't have a book to hold up.
Oh yes, Elisa.
Okay. I'll take the screenshot and then I'll send it to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So wait, it's Command Option 4. Yeah.
She's so smart, y'all.
No. Sorry. No.
I just have a button that says print screen. That one usually works.
What is it? It's Command Shift 4. Yes. There we go. Command Shift. All right. 1, 2, 3. Say cheese. There we go.
Cool. And just submit, email it to us. The other thing, as y'all all know the business, get your libraries to buy the book. If you haven't shared it on social media, please share. We have a discount code for 30% off, I believe, which if you haven't received an email about that, then please let me know. But we want to help promote the book. If you know someone who might want to review it, or if you're on the call and you want to review it, Elisa.
I got deadlines. I got too many deadlines. I would love to. Actually, I mean, maybe if it can wait a few months, I can absolutely do it at the end of the summer.
Cool. We'll talk.
Yay, thanks.
Yay.
Yeah, absolutely.
But thank you all again. But have your library order the book. That is one of the most important things to help promote the life of this book. And thank you all. Y'all are amazing. Seriously, every chapter in this book is rock solid. And this is really a field-defining book. I mean, I'm not just saying that because I edited it with Christina, but
It is. It's really
a
amazing.
result of everyone's work here. So thank you all.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for doing
Thank
all
you,
this work to Trevor and Christina. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, and Trevor, make sure to send the video.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
I will send an email after.
Okay.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.